Okay, thank you very much for joining. We will now start with the sectors of the economy. And now let me first start with the two schools of thought in economics. The first and the oldest school of thought is known as the classical school of thought. Now, uh, the classical school of thought, which existed before the First World War and before the market crash of 1929, the adherents of this school of thought believed that the market was always in full employment. It could achieve full employment, and any intervention by any outside forces, like let's say the government, will only bring about a distortion in the market forces and thereby disturb the free flow and the proper functioning of the market. uh, People in those days believed in something which was called the Say's law, and the Say's law says that supply creates its own demand. And therefore, because people will produce and market forces will ensure that things are consumed, the market forces were the governing forces here, and therefore there was no room for any intervention from any outside agency, most importantly, the government. When they said that the market will take care of itself, they meant that there will be no shortages and no surpluses. Everything will be in balance. The market will be at rest, and people will meet their needs profitably. However, um, uh, after the Great Depression, the Keynesian school of thought, introduced by Sir Maynard Keynes, was introduced, and it gave a completely new perspective on income and employment. Sir Keynes spoke about the multiplier effect. He spoke about injections and withdrawals, which means that the classical view that whatever is produced will be sold, that incomes will be equal to expenditures. He said, no, these things don't happen in reality. What happens in reality is that there will be some leakages, there will be some withdrawals from the circular flow of income. The income will not flow in a proper circular fashion between the households and the firms. No, in reality, there will be some injections, there will be some investments in the economy. And there will also be some withdrawals. There are going to be some savings on the part of the households. So this causes trade cycles. It leads to booms and recessions. And whenever there's a recession, there is a case for government intervention. So here, then we have the sectors of an economy, the parts of the economy. So the sectors of the economy are four. In any economy, there are going to be households, firms, government, and the international trading sector. So, what will the households do? They will consume, they will get the income, and what will they do with the income? They will consume and save. What will the firms do? They will take the savings from these households and they will make investments in new businesses and new ventures. What will the government do? It's going to impose taxes and use the taxes to spend, which will create further activity in the economy. And then the exports will create additional demand in the country and lead to increase in national income. So based on these sectors, then there are types of economies. There's the two sector economy, in which there are only the households and the firms. There is the three sector economy, in which either there's going to be household, firm, and government, where the economy is closed, it has no connection with the outside world, or there's going to be household, firms, and the international trading sector. And then surely there's going to be the four sector economy, where there will be households, firms, government, and the international sector. So let me give you one or two very important concepts which will continue in all these types of economies. The first is the desired expenditure. The desired expenditure is the expenditure that you want to make, that people want to make based on their resources, based on their incomes, and it's not necessary that there is going to be that there is going to be an equality between the expected expenditure or the desired expenditure and the actual expenditure. You've produced goods worth 20,000. okay, thinking that you will be able to sell 20,000 worth of products, but you end up selling only 15,000. So your actual expenditure is 20,000, but your desired was only 15,000, because that is what you wanted to sell, because you wanted to spend the money only on what was sold, not what was left behind. So what is the extra expenditure? 20,000, which is the actual, 15,000, which was the desired, 5,000 you overspent. So there's no rule that says that there has to be an equality between the desired expenditure and the actual expenditure. National income accounting, please keep in mind, has to take these four elements into consideration. What is the national income of a country? Consumption, investment. Consumption is done by household, investment is made by firms. Government expenditure, of course, is done by the government, and net exports is exports minus imports. This is done by the international trading sector. Now, let's come to expenditures. Okay, expenditure is done by the consumer, the government, and the businesses. These expenditures can be autonomous and induced, and here I'm going to apply expenditure only to the consumer, though this can be applied in. Of course, when we go to the next chapters, we will see that the autonomous and induced elements are present in both businesses and the government. But let's now look at what is autonomous consumption. Autonomous consumption simply means that no matter what happens, even if the income goes down to zero, there will be a certain level of consumption that will definitely take place. Okay, we cannot live without bread, so a minimum level of expenditure on bread will take place. Okay, so that uh, part of the consumption which is not dependent upon changes in your income, national income or personal income, that component of the consumption is called autonomous consumption. It is not dependent upon the changes in the income. Whereas the induced element, the induced consumption will be induced, it will happen because of an increase in income. So the income which arises because of an increase, the consumption which arises because of an increase in income is the induced consumption element. So then what is consumption equal to? Consumption is equal to the autonomous consumption, which in this equation is shown by CA, and uh, BY, which is the induced level of, which is the consumption which is induced by the income. Y here represents the income. So the consumption is dependent on. That's why it's called the function. When you say function, what do you mean? Something is a function of something. It means that something, if x, or let's say if y is a function of x, it means that y is dependent on x. The function is just another way of saying this is dependent on that. So look at the equation. C is equal to ca plus by. So c is a function of, c is dependent on two things. What is it dependent on? Number one, it is dependent upon autonomous consumption. Autonomous consumption here is ca. So the autonomous consumption is the consumption which will take place irrespective of income. But then consumption is also dependent upon your y, which is the income. Okay, so the by is the induced, is the consumption which is being induced by a change in income, whereas ca is the autonomous. It has nothing to do with income. It will take place irrespective of income. It does not mean that autonomous consumption is not dependent on things. It depends on a few things like interest, wealth, and savings. If your current income is zero, but you have some wealth, then you are going to use that wealth to continue consuming even when your incomes are very low. There are certain assumptions here, and we need to look into those assumptions. The one of the assumptions is that the economy is complex. Okay, there is a fixed level of national income. The fixed level of national income, recall, if you recall the production possibility. So the fixed level of national income depends upon the income that will come when all the resources are fully employed. But then here we are also assuming that these resources are always not fully employed. There is an element of unemployment and there will be some unemployment. Therefore, so if there is unemployment, what does it mean? It means that it is possible to increase your national income. So that is the first assumption here. It is possible to increase your national income because of some unemployment. Remember, the classical school of thought used to say that there is always full employment. Second, when we are making these calculations, we are saying there is no inflation. Huh. Economics is the science of assumptions. You can assume anything. In reality, there is inflation in certain economies, very high levels of inflation. But we are assuming that no, from one year to the next, there is no inflation. We are also assuming that technology is more or less constant. Okay, so the relationships between input and output are determined by a constant state of technology, and this is then your two sector economy in which the firm pays income to the household, which becomes the earnings of the household, and the household then purchases from the firms things to consume, and that means that the entire income earned is then paid back to the firm. But in reality, if you look at it, households withdraw some of their incomes and put them in savings in the banks, and the banks then injects that money back into the projects of the firms. All right. So we'll stop here, and then in the next video, we are going to look at the balance and the imbalances in withdrawals and injections. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Please go through this.